I'm going to ask you a question that might be difficult for you to answer.
Okay.
Of all this aircraft, what was your favorite one?
I have to say the F-14. The Phantom was a great airplane, but it was a earlier generation airplane. So that airplane never necessarily made you look good. You had to make that airplane look good. And so if you were an average pilot, you were never going to be much better than average because that airplane's not helping you a whole lot. You've got to work hard to make the Phantom do what you want to do. Where the Tomcat, later generation, like an F-18, that can make an average pilot look good because you've got an airplane that'll perform now, that has a lot more capability throughout the realm, everything from weapons system to aircraft performance. So it took a good pilot to make a Phantom look good.
So you had a lot of real-world experience beyond training, and we talked a little bit about some of those experiences outside the studio. Can you walk us through some of the deployments that you had where you had contact with the enemy?
Yeah, the first time with Phantoms in VF-31, the first time, they were peacetime deployments. We call those love boat cruises. We'd go to the Mediterranean, and basically, due to cost, we would spend 51% of time in port. So it was a lot of fun. And so that was really, we trained for the real world threat. We carried live missiles in the Med. We intercepted Soviet airplanes all the time because they were looking at us just like we were looking at them. But it was all a big game, okay? We never really had any conflict to deal with during that time frame. Now, when I was in VF-102 in the F-14, in my second deployment, that's when we had the conflict with Libya, and that was in the spring of 1986. If you put yourself back in 1986, Gaddafi was in power in Libya. And he was generally acknowledged as a state supporter of terrorism. And incidents began to pile up, and evidence kept pointing toward his involvement in those incidents, including the Achille Lauro incident where they threw the passenger in the wheelchair over the ship, killed him. There was a bombing of a discotheque in Greece, I believe, during that same time frame. There were lots of incidents that were going on that indicated that Gaddafi was behind them, at least with material support, okay? And it caused a lot of friction. And President Reagan at the time was not tolerant of this. And so we put out some ultimatums, and Libya came back with some. The bottom line was Gaddafi finally said that he owned the Gulf of Sidra out to more than 50 miles, the whole Gulf. And he had a line of death that he drew up there. Now, we only recognize a 12-mile limit typically around all countries. Outside that, it's international waters, international airspace. Gaddafi, was not satisfied with that, and he said, "You come into my line of death, blow my line of death, and we'll spill your blood," okay? That sets the whole thing up, and all he did was end up poking Reagan with a stick, and Reagan said, "Okay, enough of this," and the rest of it's history. At the time, like I said, I was in Fighter Squadron 102, flying F-14As. I was the maintenance officer of the squadron at the time. We rotate through jobs in a Navy squadron, and once you're senior, we call them department head jobs. Ops, maintenance, for example, those are department head jobs. At the time, I was running maintenance in that squadron. And we had been intercepting the Coral Sea, the America, the Saratoga. There had been several ships over there during this time frame. And we'd been intercepting Libyans. If you remember, we shot down two, I'm trying to think, about 1983, two airplanes were shot down by F-14s. And then later on, we got a couple more after all this took place. But so there was always a tension, and they would come out and they would do simulated ACM, not so we had pre-briefed it or anything like that, but they would be aggressive. we fortunately had superior airplanes, and we would always get behind them, and they would always go back home. Well, when Gaddafi declared the line of death, we decided that we would penetrate it. We didn't decide it. National Command Authority did. And so I was a member of a crew of the first airplanes to go below the line of death, me and my wingman. So we did that about noon. Penetrated the line of death, and I knew that the biggest threat to us was probably not a Libyan airplane, but a Libyan SAM. And the particular SAM that they had at the time that what we considered a big threat to us out to sea was the SA-5 Gammon, which is a long-range missile that previous to this had only been used to guard Moscow, for example, high-value areas. Long-range missile, 50 feet long, about 150-kilometer missile. And so I was very aware of that and the envelope that that missile projected off the coastline. But we decided we were pressing down, and we got below the line of death, and we penetrated the envelope of the missile because that was part of the mission. And we kept drilling around down there just to exercise our freedom of navigation rights. And my Rio, on one inbound run, called out, "Hey, Flash, I've got 2 high-speed contacts coming out of Gurtabaya, or CERT. It's an airfield down there in the bottom of the Gulf of Sidra." And I said, "Okay, great." You know, I called my wingman. I said, "Okay, we got 2 high-speed contacts on the nose. They're passing 12,000 feet. Let's climb to intercept." So we lit the burners, started to climb. And, of course, I'm pulling the nose up to center them in my HUD so I could get a tally-ho on them. Well, about that time, the Rio calls back, who was the skipper of the squadron, my good friend Sparky Lyle, and he says, "Flash, they're passing 30,000 feet now, and they're doing 1,280 knots of ground speed." I said, "Sparky, those can't be fox bats, you know, that's short of a time to accelerate that fast." And I pulled the HUD up, looked through the diamond, and here they are, line of bearing left, 2 SA-5s coming right down the nose, or the snot locker, as we called it. So I called to my wingman because I immediately realized they were SAMs. Said, "SAMs on the nose. Let's break starboard, hit the deck." So we did that. We popped out every round of chaff and flares in the airplane. Not that they would do a whole lot of good. You know, the missiles themselves were CW guided missiles, so the flares wouldn't have done much good. The chaff could have done some, but my whole goal was to get below the radar horizon because these missiles require a base station to illuminate us, okay? And if that base station couldn't see us, the missile couldn't see us, is putting it in layman's terms. We got below the radar horizon. At that point, the missiles broke contact with us, climbed up to about 80,000 feet, and just waited for us to come back up. In case we did, then they could have reacquired us from the ground station, and the missiles could have come down and popped us. I knew the time of flight of the missiles, and I didn't want to pop back up until that time of flight was exceeded. Once it was, we did pop back up. We saw the contrails where they re-entered and came back through the cons, and they impacted about a mile from where we initially broke, okay? And determined later that they actually had some lat long dialed in them, so had we popped back up, we could have been viable targets again. So at that point, they launched a helicopter out to pick up the survivors. Because of all the chaff we popped out, they thought they hit us. So in fact, that they came out and claimed that they'd shot down 2 F-14s. That was just the chaff that we had popped out, and it fooled them. So as the helicopter came out, of course, we asked permission to shoot the helicopter down. They said, "No, we'll handle this later." You know, they're out there on a mission of quote, mercy, you know. Yeah, they would have.
It takes a lot of discipline, I assume.
Yeah, they would have filleted us, I'm sure. So bottom line is, you know, our cycle was up. We went back to ship. We were relieved by some VF-33 airplanes, which was our sister squadron on the America. And so we were biding our time now, but now the hackles are up. And there was some indication they may have launched a couple more SA-5s later on. At that point, and I can't remember the exact timeline, but we went out there at night and sank a Le Combattant and an Anuchka, which were 2 of their patrol boats, which were headed out toward the fleet, okay, in the direction of the Ticonderoga and some of the other ships we had. So that night, our A7s and A6s went out and one A6 launched a harpoon into an Anuchka, and I think they used a harpoon on the Le Combatant as well. So we sank a couple of their boats. Everything was pretty quiet, after that for a while. And then I think the next thing that precipitated El Dorado Canyon was the bombing of the discotheque, which we referred to before. So that was the first engagement. That was Operation Prairie Fire. And like I said, that was about the 24th, I think, of March. It's all a little foggy right now, but and then you fast forward to the 14th of April, and I believe that was the commencement of Operation El Dorado Canyon. El Dorado Canyon was planned to strike targets, tactical targets, in Benghazi and also Tripoli. Tripoli was on the western part of Libya. Benghazi was on the eastern part. Now, the Air Force was assigned the targets in Tripoli, and they were going to attack those targets with F-111s, which were based out of England. And those F-111s had to fly because France wouldn't give them authority to fly over the country, all the way around through inside the Straits of Gibraltar, all the way around Spain and France, into the Mediterranean, fly down, high altitude, tank at least 2 or 3 times. They used practically every tanker asset the Air Force had at that time. They came in, then dropped down to low altitude, then struck targets in Tripoli. At the same time, our A6s and F-18s from the American, the Coral Sea, struck targets over in Benghazi. And my job that night was to provide CAP services for the F-111s out of Great Britain.
CAP services.
CAP services means to protect them from any fighters that might come up, okay? And also to act as decoys for their SAMs. So in other words, before the F-18, the F-111s coasted in, we had flown, this is backing up a little bit, it was a dark night. We planned it to be no moon. So we launched.
I'm sorry to interrupt. This would have been in 80.
This would have been in 86, April of 86.
Okay.
And it was a dark night. We planned it to be a dark night for the strike. And we planned it so that the moon would be coming up about the time we came back to the ship, which makes carrier landings a whole lot more comfortable. So we launched off, no radar, no communication, MCON as we call it, took off, stayed at 500 feet from the carrier, flew about 150 miles to our point down off the coast of Libya, still at 500 feet, just circling. No radar altimeters even on. We didn't want to give them any idea that we were coming. And then about the time that the F-111s were supposed to pop in over the coast, we climbed up to altitude, cut our radars on, cut our lights on, started talking. In other words, let the Libyans know that we are there, not that the 111s are there. We were acting as a head fake. And of course, then the town lit up. About the time the 111s came across, the flare, they lit the whole town up with flares. There were SA-2s, SA-3s, Crotals launched. And so what we would do is drive in as close as we could to the shoreline and illuminate the airfields, trying to see if anybody was getting airborne, because we were cleared to fire on anything above 5,000 feet. The F-111s were down low. The Libyans taxied, but none of them ever got airborne. Now, we heard a rumor later that Gaddafi executed a bunch of them for failure to comply with orders to get airborne, but they knew one way or the other they were going to get smoked, So, and in the course of that, you're excited. So, I'm going faster inbound than I'm going outbound. So I kept getting closer and closer to the beach. Well, I got inside an SA-2 envelope, and I saw SA-3s and SA-2s coming up, but you could tell that they weren't guiding, and they would fall, either back down the land or out in the water.
When you see these, are you seeing them through the naked eye?
Yeah, through the naked eye. Through the naked eye. These missiles. Yeah. Now, the other ones originally picked up on radar.
Gotcha.
These I was just picking up visually, and using our electronic countermeasures. In there we had systems which would provide strobes in the direction that the threat was coming from. So I knew in what direction to look. We also had strike and harm shooters out there on station with us. That was another thing we were supposed to do, is protect them. And so they would shoot harms and strikes, which were anti-radiation missiles that were targeted at the SAMS sites, the radars that they were using to guide the missiles. So you cut on a radar to guide your missile, now my missile comes down your throat, okay? So that was the concept, shut those missiles down. And that was very effective, we found out later. And but the problem was I kept going, and so I kept getting closer and closer. And at one point, I knew what the envelope of the SA-2 was, and I had penetrated. I'd gotten fairly close. Well, I looked at one, and it looked like it had our numbers coming right down the snot locker, as we say. So I lit the burners, pulled hard on the airplane, and started pulling out. And about the same time, the first bomb at the Sidi Bilal training complex on the coast went off, and the bright flash was bright enough that it lit up the rondelles or the Navy on my wing and the star. I could see that, and I thought that the SA-2 had gone off behind me. My heart stopped. Holy smoke, you know. And then I realized that, no, that wasn't an SA-2. That was a bomb on the beach. And, of course, now that my heart's beating again, we came right back down looking again, because our reason for being there was to bag somebody. But of course they didn't fly. But my reason for being there was to bag somebody. I told you that our ancillary reason was to be a decoy, and that's what we provided. So that was an exciting night. And the problem with the whole deal for me personally was we were all supposed to go and get 2,000 pounds of gas after we took off of the ship from our tankers, okay, our KA-6 tanker. The problem was my airplane would not take gas that night. I had a problem with my refueling valve. It wouldn't open up. So as I plugged into the tanker, I couldn't receive any gas. And so I told the skipper in my back seat, Sparky, I said, Sparky, we can't take any gas. And he goes, well, what do you think we ought to do? Because we had planned this down to where we were going to come back with about 2,500, 3,000 pounds max in the airplanes once we got back. And I said, Sparky, how many times do you think we're going to ever have in our lifetime to get to do something like this again? He goes, I'm with you. So we went down without tanking. So we started off 2,000 pounds below everybody else. So now when we came back to the ship, you know, and everybody's coming back, and a lot of guys are low state, and you're in a big long line coming in, and if you bolter or wave off, now you've got to get back in a pattern and do the whole thing all over again, and that causes a lot of wasted fuel, a lot of gas consumption, which I didn't have. So I knew that I had to get aboard the first time. So I came in, and fortunately the moon was up. It was a nice night. Probably flew the best pass I've ever flown in my life. Caught the 3-yellow iron trap that had about 1,200 pounds left. So, you know, would I make that same decision again? Yeah, probably, you know, but was it a good decision? You know, yeah, probably. We had spares on the deck, but we got to fly the mission, and it worked out very well. So
let's talk a little bit about the aircraft. Again, understanding that people watching this, whether they watch it this year or 40 years from now, they might not understand the capabilities of that aircraft. Tell us a little bit about the aircraft, the crew, and the capabilities.
Well, of course, the aircraft, the generations of the aircraft and the capability change with time. And not only does the aircraft performance change, but the weapon systems change. And so it's a constant learning process. You will never in the Navy as a pilot feel like that you have mastery over your weapon system, because it's continually evolving. So it's a continual learning evolution. You know, you go to Top Gun, you come back there thinking, and I went to Top Gun back in 1979, you think you come back as an expert, but that's perishable. You've got to continue training throughout your entire career. And as far as capabilities go, I saw a dramatic leap in both aircraft performance and weaponeering. But today, it's gone so far past what I did that my sons will tell me off the non-classified stuff, which is just flabbergasting to me. Open source stuff that you can look up. You know, it's amazing the capability that they've got right now with helmets. If they can see you, they can kill you. I mean, I don't care where you are in the battle. You know, it's amazing stuff that I didn't have I didn't have in Libya, attacking Libya like we did with airplanes. You think we'd be doing that today? Of course not. Tactics have totally changed.
Yeah.
So it's a whole different world.
This is a two-seater?
The Tomcat and the Phantom are both two-seaters.
Okay.
An A4 Echo that I flew was a single-seater.
Gotcha. And so the other aviator, he's behind you, correct?
Yes.
And he's doing, what are his responsibilities?
He's we call them radar intercept officers, okay, RIOs. Now they call them weapon systems operators, WSOs. And you have, back then, all Tomcats were two-seaters, and all the Phantoms we flew were two-seaters. So we all had there were lots of RIOs in the Navy. Now they've gone to about half the F-18s are two-seaters and half are single-seaters. And the job of the WSO or the RIO is pretty similar. It's nice to have somebody else in the airplane to share the duties, and especially in the Phantom or the Tomcat when things weren't as automated as they are right now. Mm-hmm. Even in FedEx, when I flew for FedEx, I started off in the 727. We had to have a flight engineer, to balance the fuel and manage the electrical system and a lot of things that are handled by automation now. I flew the MD-11 after that, much bigger airplane, much more complex. Only took 2 pilots to fly. We didn't need a flight engineer anymore because all that stuff has been automated, okay? So that's kind of the way it's gone right now from the F4, F-14 to the F-18. A lot of automation stuff, but at the same time, they've thrown more stuff into the back seat for that guy and compounded his problem, and giving him more to do. I can't speak much to the backseaters of the F-18, but the F-14 RIO operated the radar, the primary modes of the radar. We let him do, he did most of the navigation and communication. And he was integral in an air combat engagement, keeping track of guys that you couldn't keep track of while you're watching somebody else. It was 2 sets of eyeballs. The other thing, coming back to the ship at night, it's awfully nice to have somebody else looking at the altimeter and checking up on you to make sure that you're not wandering off course or off altitude or whatever the case may be. There's been lots of times where it's awfully comfortable having that second guy in there.
Are you always flying with the same guy?
No. You were primarily crewed with one guy, but especially after you got senior, you were eligible to fly with anybody. It's kind of an inverse relationship. When you're a new pilot, you'll fly with a senior RIO, okay? Because they want some experience in that cockpit, either in the front seat or the back seat. Once you gain experience as a pilot, then you'll start training junior RIOs. In my particular case, in that conflict, in that El Dorado Canyon, I told you I was flying with the CO of the squadron. Well, if you're the CO of the squadron, you get to pick whoever you want to fly with. So if you're CO of the squadron and you're a backseater, do you think you're going to fly with the Nugget if you can avoid it? Of course not, especially not in combat. So that's why he picked me, because I was one of the senior pilots. Mm-hmm. So.
Well, he wasn't the same that you were flying the first one for
yes.
Prairie Fire?
Yeah, Prairie Fire, yeah.
You were with him on both?
Yes. I probably have 350 carrier arrested landings with him and probably close to 1,000 hours because I flew with him in two different squadrons. Wow. And just a great guy.
Let's talk a little bit about the carrier itself that you were on. What carrier was this?
This was the USS America that we were involved in a Libyan conflict with. And it was a large deck oil burner. Now, the other 2 carriers I mentioned, and I've been on a lot of different carriers for brief workups, brief amount of times, going out there to carrier qual and stuff like that, the Eisenhower, the Independence, a lot of different carriers. But my primary deploying carriers, the ones I did 6-month deployments on, were the Saratoga, which was a smaller oil burning carrier. Then the America, which was a larger oil-burning carrier, and then the Forrestal, which was, again, another smaller oil-burning carrier. I never made a major deployment on a nuclear boat, and that was by choice, because back in my time frame, nuclear boats were limited in some of the ports that they could visit, so I wanted a boat that I could go into port and see some of the world,
so. Tell us a little bit about the America. How big of a ship is this? How many guys are operating this thing?
Typically on one of these ships, they're in 1,000 feet long. Okay, they're a crew somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 individuals. It's a floating city. Each squadron is an autonomous unit that augments the carrier. The carrier is run by surface naval officers, typically. Okay. And it's our hotel, basically, and our base of operations. A squadron is an autonomous unit. I had my own, of course, aircraft mechanics, but I also had my own bakers, dispersing clerks, medical personnel. And so when we would go aboard a carrier, the carrier didn't have enough people to support an air wing when it came aboard. So we brought our own people to support ourselves and augmented the carrier services with those people. Okay, makes sense?
Yeah.
So in other words, we could go anywhere and take our own people and augment the station we went to or augment the ship, and we weren't a burden on the ship that way.
Gotcha.
As far as manning.
What about your living conditions? You have like a little...
It's not like the old days when you slept in hammocks, and they packed you in, but we had a 96-man bunk room, for example. We had 96 sailors in one bunk room, and they're packed 2 and 3 high, in their bunk. Living space.
The officers too? Or
no, the officers would have maybe an 8-man bunk room. That was the first bunk room I stayed in. That was on the Saratoga. It was 8 of us as JOs. And once you get senior, then you go to 2-man staterooms, and then typically when you're a CO, then you get your own stateroom. Okay, but space is at a premium. Yeah. On a carrier, obviously, and living space and privacy is at a minimum. So,
I imagine you don't have a lot of downtime, but what do you and the other sailors do to kill time on one of these ships?
Well, the work day was full, maintaining those airplanes, keeping them flying. When we were at sea, we were pretty much working around it. We had 3 shifts. We're working around the clock. If you had any downtime at all, of course, they had the ship's entertainment system where you could watch movies. They had popcorn. The weight rooms, you could go work out. When we weren't flying, you could jog on the flight deck, that sort of stuff. We even hit golf balls off the back of the flight deck on occasion. But when you really had your recreation was when you pulled into port. Now, that was back in the old days. A lot of these guys today, like we talked about earlier, will be out there for 100 days and never see a port, that sort of thing. And that's hard on the guys, and it's hard on retention.
If you have a conversation to talk to a young man or young woman and they're saying, hey, I hear that you're retired from the Navy, I'm thinking about joining myself. What advice would you give to a young man or a young woman on how to succeed in the military?
We get that question a lot. People come in here, and there's no nobler profession, okay? Let's face it, we're a member of the citizens of the United States. We want to give back. And the best way to give back is to serve your country in the military, as far as I'm concerned. There are other ways to do it, but the primary way, if you're capable, and that's the issue too, are you physically and mentally capable to serve? I mean, it's a fairly narrow niche at the top of the pyramid of people that can serve. And so those people, we try to push, and I tell them, depend on the situation that they're in, but I tell them, hey, concentrate for pilots in particular. I said, concentrate on your grades, okay, in school, work hard, okay, but also be a well-rounded individual. You want a social animal too. I don't want a guy who is straight A's in school but can't relate to anybody. This is a big team. I look at it like a big football team. You want to put the biggest, meanest, toughest individuals that you can in that squadron that are trained as good as completely as you can get, and they have to be homogenous to work together as that team. So I tell these guys, I said, work hard in school, but also participate in extracurricular activities, some team sports, join a fraternity. Okay, learn to lead while you're there, and the military will give you every opportunity to on a graduate level after that. So There's no nobler profession. And I think that our veterans, when they come out of the military, are excellent hire candidates for any company for that matter. Not only do they have leadership techniques, but they know how to get along with people, and that's a big issue. And they've been a proven track record with performance, and they've mastered skills, and they are flexible. All those things that make you good in the military will make you even better in the civilian world. So those young guys, I say, hey, look, if you can gut out 20 years at a minimum in the Navy, you'll have received an education bar none in addition to what you already have. And then you'll have health care, retirement money. You can do what you want to do after that, not what you have to do. And it gives you a lot of flexibility. So I encourage all those guys, number one, to get into the military, and number two, stay in as long as you can. And if you can make 20, do it, That was the highlight of my life. And I think that you ask any veteran, whether they do 4 years or whether they do 24 years, what do you consider the highlight of your life? And typically, it's their military service. I mean, you can go sell life insurance or you can sell cars or whatever else, but there's no comparison to time spent in the military. The people you meet, the lifelong friendships, the skills that you get. I mean, that's what I'd like them to know, that service is honorable, and it's not a one-way street, though. You're not just giving back, you're receiving too. This is a gift, and I consider it a tremendous honor and privilege to have been able to serve in the United States military.